Hi, Jamie.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm excited. I have new glasses.
Yay,
I can see.
they look great
Yeah.
as well. Really good.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
So I realised we were a day late today, so we're going to be heading into Monday morning, but for this recording, I believe, or Sunday night, maybe it'll be uh, a cozy Sunday night podcast that people can listen to. Um, but I guess this last week, I've been thinking a lot about your article from last week, beginning of last week, and previous ones from January, and obviously your up and coming paper that you've submitted as well. And thinking about the evidence for Gestalt language processes. And it feels almost, well, it doesn't feel, it feels uncomfortable even asking that question as you are a Gestalt language processor. So saying there's no evidence, well, you're here in front of my very eyes. I do believe I'm not having a hallucination or imagining things. Um, so thinking about um, the evidence, what kind of things are going maybe wrong in terms of the questions, and where do you think we should be looking at? That's a
Oh
biggie.
my goodness. Well, for the next 2 hours, I will explain. No, I think we have to start with the obvious, and that is there is no blood test, there is no vision test, there is no AI algorithm that can say, oh, this person's speech patterns, etc., etc.
Yeah,
There is no test for GLP. With that in mind, I wrote, I don't know, last month, about a month ago,
yeah,
what I called recognizing Gestalt processors. I think that's what you're referencing, the decodering.
yeah.
And so professionally, writing from within the phenomenon, right? I am autistic. I am a Gestalt processor. How does those things, from a brain standpoint, from a processing standpoint, show up in the data, right? And so in the US, the majority of students who have these individualized educational plans, the IEPs, the GLPs will show up in specific learning disability eligibilities, right? And the justification that the system has, the BASC-3 and all of these kinds of tests that they're given, um, the justification has to do with like phonological processing, verbal memory, all of these kinds of things. And so
Mm,
when somebody asks me, like, you say the student is a Gestalt processor, how do you know? And so I wrote a very kind of long piece, I think, about all the different places where this shows up, right?
mhm.
And so, from the standpoint of identity, right, I don't think I've found a student that would latch onto GLP or Gestalt processing and say, I am, and let's go to war and battle over this identity piece. I don't think that's the case. I think
No.
for them, it's kind of mildly amusing. Like, oh, that kind of explains it, but you're doing all of this to help me anyway, so I don't care. Right. And that's, in American high school where I'm at, um, there's quite a lot of supports thrown at students. When I see autistic children, that have that eligibility for support, there is a pattern that I have recognized in the data. And the way it works is this: you have males and you have females. And in a general sense, the males are misbehaving. And so whether or not they have language support needs is irrelevant. They're given the autism support so they can have the behavioral modifications. So they're not throwing things at people, they're not hitting people, they're not having tantrums and stamping and all of these kinds of things that we think negatively about autism and the stereotypes. But those socialized as female, they're more conversational. And as soon as you have a conversation and a friend, you're not autistic. And the system says, okay, fine. Now, obviously, you're having problems with language and stuff, so we'll give you this specific learning disability. And you see that in those socialized as male as well, but it's more, in terms of academic eligibilities and so on, it's autism is a behavioral thing in America. And the
Mm.
language stuff They might say that, the primary eligibility is autism because of the behaviors, and they're assigned behavioral interventionists and all of these kinds of
Yeah.
supports. And then there is an underlying specific learning disability or impairment, the SLD or SLI. They're two different things. But so I wrote that, and one of my favorite tools is called the Basic Reading Inventory. Because again, I'm in high school. If you're a Gestalt processor, you have learned sight words. You've memorized these scripts around things. You're not, as long as there's no intellectual impairment, right? They're generally what we would think as like grade 3 or 4 in terms of literacy. And so they
Hmm.
know CVC words, they know, standard stuff, what, where, why, those kinds of, they can recognize them on the page. But what the basic reading inventory does is it gives word lists, and it gives paragraphs and short stories that they've never seen before. In the word list, it's orders they've never seen before. And I don't really focus on what they've, whether they can do the phonological, whether they can do the phonics and sound out things, by the conventions of
Hmm.
simplified English that we use in America. I want to feel how they react when they see it.
Yeah.
I've had kids melt down, have panic attacks, because they're so used to performing, and they're so used to kind of demurring to, I don't know, um, but this is kind of a formal test. It's part of the academic, 3-year evaluation, the triennial, academic testings and stuff. And I explained to them, there's no jeopardy in any of this. I just want to know where you're at. I just want to know what you can read, and there's a lot of words that come to English from French and from Spanish and Latin and stuff. And so I just want to
Yeah.
see how you do with it. And I've had kids giggle at nonsense words, right? Because inside of these word lists, there are nonsense words. They follow the conventions of English, but they're nonsense. And I don't know, and that reaction is one of the clues that I use. It's not definitive, but it's evident, if you will, right? Because I'm inside the phenomenon. I know how it
Mm.
feels when you're kind of trapped. I've been in meetings, and people have thrown, mountains of paperwork at me. I'll give you 5 minutes to scan this and then we'll talk about it. I feel the panic, right? I don't have any access to text in paper form. I don't work that way. My supports are not available. So I break out my mobile. It has Adobe Scan. I start scanning it. Like, what are you doing? I said, well, you know about my documented support needs. I need this digitally, right? So I can employ my tech on it. I use Google Notebook, that kind of stuff. It needs to be in digital form so I can engage with it. And given that you've provided me 50 pages, I'll be back in a few hours. Well, no, 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 we can't do that. We cannot do that. You know, so I'm inside the phenomenon. I understand that panicky feeling. I understand that kind of nervous giggle that happens, right? And I understand what it's like when you're completely overwhelmed by this and you start crying.
Mm.
So when I feel that with a student, that's an evidence item. That's part of the decoder ring, right? So in addition to the things that the school psychologist notes about, deficits in phonological processing and visual memory and all these kinds of things, um, this is another piece of that, and we put it together.
Mm.
Then the next step for me is obviously the meeting with the parents, and I explain Gestalt processing. I explain what I found in data, why I think there are problems academically, and so on. Not from the standpoint of like I'm trying to describe and identify your child as a kind of monolithic, here's where they are, but I want to try and
Yeah.
kind of explain, why they had to do credit recovery in summer school, why they had to do, a lot of things over again, why the data say they're at third grade, but they're in 11th grade, and this kind of thing. And usually the parents are like refreshed, happy. Like
Yeah.
finally somebody's explaining this to me in a way that I can understand. And from that standpoint, it makes perfect sense. And then
Hmm.
also from the path forward, right? So all of these things, right? Recognizing who you are, that's no place for autism, right? How to teach language in general education to analytics and Gestalt processing. Well, that's holistic language instruction. But I
Hmm.
deal with a population who are foreign to English, but are still Gestalt processors. Well, that's decolonizing language education. So that kind of trilogy, if you will, that is the kind of explanation across those three books. I think there's 75 pages of references. So it's not just me babbling about things. I've done a lot of work. And the thing that I don't, the book that is not getting a lot of traction right now is the foreign language aspect, right? But I think it should get the most
Mm,
because, in London you have South Asian population that you're trying to bring into, the public school, and here we have migrant populations that speak a variety of the world's languages. And so how do
yeah,
we support them and get them up to scratch and stuff? And so to me, that was the most important book. But I think current politics are kind of obscuring the fact that people speak something other than simplified English, right? If you
yeah.
just say it loud enough and slow enough, they'll understand your English, right? It's kind of the American school way. So apologies to everyone else.
So, what other questions should we be asking in research? So that's one aspect of it is the um, as a teacher, you these are some of the themes that you're seeing. What other questions should we be asking? And why is it that the current research is saying it doesn't it doesn't even exist? And like I said, it started off saying I'm sat opposite you now. Um, so what is it about that methodology that's leading them to say this doesn't exist?
But I think it's a lack of curiosity, actually.
Mm,
Um, I look at kind of the longitudinal things, right? Marge's work is longitudinal. My work
yeah,
is longitudinal. I see students within the same school district. They might move from primary school to secondary school, etc. But I have access to all their data because they're in the same district. So I can see over time growth or lack of growth, whether or not skills hold and develop, or whether or not there's regression, whether or not there are specific problems that we can point to. I see, a lifetime of data. And I ask why. Why am I seeing the things that I'm seeing? Right? Why is it that students in my district never really progress in mathematics beyond primary school? What is it? Right? And so if I was to do a study, I would not look at the children themselves because they're all suffering. I would look at the soil. What's wrong with the curriculum? Is the curriculum fit for purpose? Are there other curricula that are more amenable to mixed environments of Gestalt processors and analytical processors? But the naysayers have done such a wonderful job convincing the academic world that we don't exist, that instructional designers are creating curricula without us in mind, thus holistic language instruction, thus the upcoming story of maths. So from that standpoint, I think it's a curiosity. It's not, I don't think sinister or whatever, but it's just, I look at this longitudinally. My current seniors, I've been with them for now 4 years. And I see the struggles daily. I talk to them. I have a relationship with them. Um, I am going to cry like a wee girl when they graduate and I don't get to see them anymore. And I'm not looking forward to that, other than buying a dress and being all fancy about that. But that's beside the point. I have a lot of data. And so as they plan for college and career and next steps, I can give them a really good, solid plan for success and connect them with resources and strengthen families and have a really good relationship with the parents and sometimes grandparents and aunts and uncles and stuff, depending on the situation. Um, and that's for me a point of pride, right?
mm,
Because I'm inside of the phenomenon. I am, I am, yeah, I'm autistic. Yeah, I'm a Gestalt processor, but I'm also that child's teacher, right? And I have been side by side with them for now 4 years. I've seen them
mhm.
grow. I've seen them struggle. I've seen boyfriends and girlfriends come and go, and all of these types of things that can upset academic trajectories, right? Um, and I have modified things in their life to accommodate them If you are a Gestalt processor and you use the curriculum that my school uses, you struggle because it's part to whole. They
Yeah.
don't give you the whole view ever. They expect you to assemble it from the little crumbs that go from lesson to lesson. And so I have the privilege of understanding mathematics and I see what the curriculum is all about. And I will push into my students, who have that accommodation, and I will say, here's what they're on about. Here's what they want to know. And here's how I think we can get to that answer, right? We can use trig ratios. We can use whatever.
Mhm.
We can use the unit circle. In some cases, we might have to, convert this base 10 to base 6, and then it's all whole numbers. And then, so I'm just explaining them like what we have to do to accomplish this goal. Um, because I understand mathematics as a Gestalt processor, right? And I've struggled with it myself. Um, and the way that I learned mathematics in school as an illiterate person was through story, through old people telling me stories about, battlefields and Cold War and engineering and all the curveballs and baseball and all this kind of stuff. So I keep that going. That's the story of maths. And from an outside view, it's well, this school is struggling in mathematics, and so we need to buy a new program. We need to buy a new remedy. We need to buy an intervention. And then you have the situation like my district has now, where they've spent over $1 billion on corporations coming in to remediate things. And they're not they're not starting with the right premise. That
Mm.
if you look at the data from school to school across the district, more often than not, this stubborn 40% of students that don't grow are Gestalt processors, and they're not being
Mhm.
taught. And I know in my own caseload, my students grow and they do well and they thrive because I recognize them as such. And I ignore the naysayers, right? In research and in my own, colleagues and stuff. And I just do what is right.
Mm.
And I have a bit of a privilege, I guess, because I'm very much older than the majority of my colleagues. So there's a bit of deference that's given me. And I have the doctorate. And so I can do a bit of that, trust me, I'm a doctor thing.
Yeah.
Um, and then every once in a while, I come across somebody from the district and the challenge a bit of whatever. And I filibuster them with articles because I've written about this from many, many different ways. And so I'll send them an email, perhaps, with a dozen things that I've written, sometimes 50, and say, when you're done reading this, contact me because in the meantime, I'll be handling this and taking care of the children. And that usually puts things to rest. But I have a privilege of that. Not everybody has, not every parent has, council district or whatever has. Um, and I've made myself available to parents. I think I've mentioned before that there was a case in Canada at the Human Rights Tribunal in Ottawa, in the Ontario province, where the provincial authorities were denying GLP. And so I wrote a brief and the family prevailed and the student got the supports that they were needing and all of that stuff. Even work with a publisher to get the books into their local library for the professional development work and all of that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of work to do, but there's me and a few others that are writing from within, from different angles. I think it tends to be me because I was illiterate. I didn't like it. And I'm honest about that. I'm
Mm.
honest. I'm honest with parents. I'm honest with students. How I was able to pass my classes, how I was able to graduate on time, and all of these kinds of things. I'm brutally honest, and I put myself out there by saying stuff. Um, but I think it's necessary because to get back to the point, I guess, Jamie, stop wandering about. Um,
I didn't get the squirrel out.
but I'm from inside of the phenomenon. I know what
Yeah.
it's like to have inaccessible curriculum, to have people that don't understand a bit about you and how you
Yeah.
work.
Mm.
Um, and I've heard things, 70s, 80s was a entirely more brutal time,
Mhm.
right?
Sure.
World War II veterans, Vietnam veterans, they didn't want to hear my support needs. They wanted me to shut up and do what I was told.
Yeah.
And when that was a problem, then I was ostracized, I was bullied, I was kicked out, I was all of these kinds of things. And so I had to, on my own, as a teen, um, figure things out because I did not have this information. And so fast forward to now, I'm writing all of this stuff kind of retrocausally to me in the past, saying this is what you needed.
Mm,
And kind of my own therapy in that sense of healing from a traumatic childhood and all of that mess. I'm making it available to everyone else, right?
yeah.
And causing all sorts of problems as a result.
I guess if we were going to sort of close on something that we could all kind of take away and think about in terms of future research, we've talked about, I guess, collating the evidence, for, like both yourself and Marge and other um, professionals, parents, from we've got that. Are there any other sort of things that we would want to be looking at as we move into the future? Because it feels at the moment that the tools that are being used are missing, just totally missing the point. They're, reading your article and my own observations of what some of the academics are saying. Well, you can't prove it. I hate that word pseudoscience because we're talking about people. And for me, that's what this research is missing is the people.
I, I that's typical Jamie, but I was in civil service. This was before forensics, before my
Mm,
job was converted to forensic science, and I was a master communication electrician. I did not need words. I did not need discussions. I did not need anything. And then 9/11 happened, and the place that I was working at within the civil service and everything, the mission changed. All of a sudden, we are doing intelligence gathering. All of a sudden, we're doing all of these kinds of things. And then that became forensics and crime scenes and science and all of this kind of stuff. And in the middle of that, we were told that in order to advance in our careers, we would have to have college degrees, right? So at the time, I'm marginally literate, right? But the panic in me comes, right? Oh my gosh, now I have to really think about this because I have to provide for my family. So I went to my boss's boss's boss and I explained myself and my panic and next steps and so on. And he was very nice and very honest and kind of brutally so, but he explained the path that he thought I should take. And he said that a lot of your peers are going to want to be managers. They're going to want to promote into management positions. And so, from that standpoint, they're going to get the MBAs and business degrees and all that kind of stuff. And he said those will be a dime a dozen. And then he said something that has stuck with me to this day. He said, "Let me explain something to you from my experience." He was a retired Marine, US Marine. He said, managers, administrators, they correct things after they've gone wrong. Leaders, they help things go right in the first place. So if you want to advance your life, not just your career, but your life, study leadership. Make that the focus of helping things go right. And so I did. I, with the help of our local sheriff, he got us, a bunch of us, into a very kind of prestigious school locally. And that's how I got my bachelor's degree in organizational leadership. And then, to my eternal surprise, I was able to do it, right? And so I got a master's degree in the same discipline. And then, from there, education stuff. But that really stuck with me. How do we help things go right? And if you can look at a theme across all 5,000 plus articles I've written, and books and so on. It's all towards helping things go right. My
Mm,
Photoshop, here is, a workflow for using Photoshop in forensic science, helping things go right, right? Holistic language instruction, here is at each level how to make things go right in your classroom. And then, the ELD side of it in the next book. The No Place for Autism. Here is a correct rendering of autism. Let's help things go right in the first place. So, from the standpoint of actually answering your question, where research happens correctly is research like my own dissertation to help things go right. What is it about college environment that is so repellent to autistic people that they voluntarily withdraw in the first semester? That was my question.
mm,
That was my research question. And I identified four very, very specific things that if we just fix these things, it would go
mm,
right. Right. And I think, I mean, aside from, housing preferences and the age of start, in your academics, for me, the one was based in Glasser's choice theory about power. And not from the standpoint of I'm bigger than you or I'm smarter than you, but oftentimes, and you'll probably see this in your therapy practice, but oftentimes autistic children are brilliant in the thing that they're interested in. They have spent hours upon
mm.
hours, and if they're Gestalt processors, their brain has spent additional sideways quantum hours. And by the time they're 18, they might as well have a PhD in that thing, whatever it is, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Whatever the thing is that they're interested in. And then they go to college and they're greeted with an adjunct who has ego issues, who is threatened by a youngling who knows more than they do. And of course, they're only 18. They lack the scrapes for dealing with, college life and so on. And so they fumble their way through it. But they realize this is rubbish. I don't want to do this at all. And they leave. And maybe they continue on somewhere else, or maybe they change trajectory altogether. But to me, again, going on that theme, helping things go right, identifying that, not from a, Jaime said so, but using theoretical constructs that explain the behaviors, that explain the choices that are made, right? Maslow's doesn't work for us. There is a there is a choice matrix that we make that says safety is more important, I'm leaving, than career advancement.
Mm,
Power and agency. I know what I know. I've studied it for a decade. I know I'm only 18, right? But this very particular thing about, the flow rate of turbochargers on a GTR Nissan, I am an absolute expert at, right? And the student comes into a mechanical engineering class and he knows all of these types of, mechanics and mathematics and physics, but he's 18 and so he's not taken seriously, or she's not taken seriously. And how do we help that go right? Right. And so I think from your, your profession, my profession,
mm.
hearing your story, the things that you've told me about your practice and how it began with Gestalt processors, you, if I can frame it this way, you began with the end in mind, and the end was, I want to help things go right for these children.
Yeah.
Myself, the same thing. I think, when I entered in Teach for America and AmeriCorps and became a teacher in my retirement and all of that stuff, Um, I was thinking I was going to teach physics or I was going to teach mathematics or, maybe poetry. I don't know. But they said, well, we can get you a job now as a special educator. And we think you're uniquely qualified being autistic and all of that stuff. And so I thought about it. I'm like, oh, I guess that makes sense.
Oh,
And here I am, this many years later, talking to you about this. But I think that is the theme that we are looking for here about helping things go right in the first place. And how in our professional lives are we doing that? Are we doing
yeah.
that? And
Yeah,
then
yeah.
does the naysayer research that looks from the outside in describing phenomenon that they don't understand and don't engage with on it on a regular basis because they are not themselves part of that population?
Yeah.
How does that help things go right? How does conflating GLP and NLA in a research paper help anybody?
No.
It doesn't.
No.
Sorry. And I'm sure the naysayers are incredibly brilliant people.
Yeah.
I think they're misguided. I think they're administrators. They're trying to correct something that they believe has gone wrong. as opposed to helping it go right. And so from that standpoint, I think they will lose
Mm,
because they're fighting something that is organic, that is living. They're trying to correct something rather than understand it. They have no
mm,
curiosity as to why we are the way we are. They just want to
yeah.
correct us. And so from that standpoint, I think um, we can finish.
I think so. But I think it's a really good place to finish as well, is thinking about how do we view things to make things better? How can we view things? How can we research to make it better? And I think that is, yeah, that's the whole crux of what we need to be looking for in the future. Well, Jamie, it's been a pleasure yet again. Thank you. And some really interesting themes and ideas. And I feel like this isn't going to be the only time we're talking along these lines.
Aye, and as always, it's good to see you, whether it's on Saturday or Sunday or Tuesday afternoon or whatever. But no, it's always a pleasure to chat to you in the weekends, and I look forward to the next one.
Yeah. See you soon.
All right, bye bye.
Bye.